The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Now, 2 o'clock Eastern Time, 11 a.m. if you're in the Pacific time zone, and various other times throughout the U.S. and around the world, depending on what time zone you're in. On behalf of Text Help, I'd like to welcome you to our EquatIO webinar. We will spend the bulk of the next hour reviewing what we think is just a phenomenal science and math-oriented tool. For those of you in the audience, this will largely be focused at the higher ed level, so a lot of the math will be sort of aimed at higher ed math. I know from the attendee list that several of you are in K-12, so if you just sort of pay attention and just think how it will fit in elementary school or middle school or high school or whatever level of math or science that you're at, that would be good. So that'll just explain why we're sort of aimed at certain math and not others for this particular time. Next slide, please. For those of you who are relatively new to GoToMeeting, I just want to take a couple minutes to just go through a little bit of what you're seeing sort of in your dashboard. Most of you will hear this across the computer, so you'll be using the computer speakers. None of you, whether you're on the computer or on a phone, will be able to actually talk into the webinar. We do that just because there's so many people. It might get a little cacophonous if too many talk at once. You are, however, able, if you see there's a little dialog box there that says questions, you will be able to type your questions in. And what we'll do, we'll kind of move most of them towards the end of our time together. We have our marketing team on the line that'll keep us organized and focused. And so towards the end of the call, they will kind of come in and ask John or I the various questions aimed at us. Next slide, please. I'm Jeff Levinson. I've been with Text Help right now. This is my 9th year with the company. I'm really excited about this product. For fun, we were talking about this. That's actually the undergraduate degree that I graduated with quite a while back. It's small enough that you can't see the date, but you may be able to tell that it's in Latin, and you also further may be able to tell that I graduated with a degree in math, which is really kind of cool. One of the reasons I'm sort of on this call, and I am particularly excited. We actually didn't have computers back then, so that was a long time ago. Well, we did, but they were mainframes. But I believe that with this EquatIO product, we're able to work math and science with students at a level far beyond what we've been able to do before. And because of that, they'll actually enjoy math and science a lot more, which to me is actually really critical. My email is there. I'm generally responsible for the southeastern mid-Atlantic region of our company. So if you are in the state running from Maryland to Florida towards the coast, I would be the one responsible for you. If you're other parts of the country, there will be other representatives that will help you. Next slide, please. Just in terms of general housekeeping, that's fine. One of the other things we've done, there may be a tab on that console that says handouts. What we've tried to do is put together all of the slides in a PDF file. Some of you actually like to take notes during the session, and so if you want to take a minute now to sort of download that, that may be good and beneficial to you. You can either, if you had read and write, you'd actually be able to take notes right on the PDF, and if you don't, you'll be able to keep track of it that way, or print it out if you have a second on the side here to print it out, and then take your notes as we go. Next slide, please. So EquatIO is kind of what we're talking about, and the slide says making math. Oh, back one slide, John, just 1 second. Sorry. If we can go back, good. So I just want to talk about EquatIO for just a second, and it says making math and science courses digital and accessible. And interesting enough, we've just had a little philosophical dialogue about this. To be very clear, EquatIO's main focus today is to take math and science and move it from a non-digital space to a digital space, and John will talk about that in just a little while. as a result of that, and as a result of some of the tools we have, EquatIO also makes math and science significantly more accessible than it has been prior to this. We recognize, however, that the level of accessibility of EquatIO does not yet approach that of our flagship read and write product. Just be aware that we are working on that and envision over the next year or so that we will continue to make EquatIO more and more fully accessible. I'll use that phrase if I can. Okay, next slide. So I'm very excited to stop talking, as you all probably are to stop hearing me, and to introduce our main speaker for today, and that would be John McGowan. John is basically the brains behind EquatIO. You can see from the slide what his history is, but John has spent a lot of years teaching math all around the world, all different levels of math. And one of the things he found, and he'll talk to this in just a second, is that making math, allowing math to be accessible through a computer opened up a whole new world for some of his students. He created this product called GMath. There are millions of users of it. And one of the things that TextHelp, our parent company, has been about is trying to continue to improve the literacy and learning of all students. And doing this in a STEM environment was very significant for us. And so a little over a year, maybe a year and a half ago, John joined the TextHelp organization to take his vision and map it with our vision. And with that, John, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you can kind of go on and talk in any way you want and show us some of the greatness of this product.
Well, thanks, Jeff. I really appreciate that introduction, and you're far too kind to talk about the brains that I have. Really, it's all just luck, and honestly, it's a bunch of teacher feedback and utilizing it in my own classroom. So thank you so much, and I'm so excited to be with TextHelp and with all the skills that we have. So one of the big things that I'm really excited to give a live demo of this as well. But before I do that, I want to get to kind of what built EquatIO, what the roadmap is and the focus is, and kind of the concept behind its creation and the specific accessibility features that benefit both students and faculty. So let's go ahead and kick things off. So the big thing is that EquatIO, I want it to be intuitive, fun, and delightful to make STEM notation online. When I say that, if in a room full of people, usually people snicker at me because those terms are never used in the same phrase unless there's a not with those. But honestly, I think it should be easy to use. It should be great math. It should be able to be communicated on a digital medium, and EquatIO, I feel like, is the first step to do that. So you shouldn't have to learn a challenging math code or a programming language to be able to represent your thoughts online. And so I think that is kind of the core part of what we have. And secondly, we built it on universal design for learning principles. So the UDL principles, I think, just make it awesome for students to be empowered and respond in a method that they prefer. And so I think that's the other fork of how we're going to build everything, is that I want to have multiple ways that students can be able to respond and get those ideas out. Regardless of what the teacher's preference is, the students should be able to communicate in the method that they prefer as well. And then finally, EquatIO integrates seamlessly with Read and Write, TextHelp's flagship literacy product. And so it delivers campus-wide accessibility across all departments. And I think that's, most of you are here because you've implemented Read and Write. And so I think that through this integration, math and STEM content can be read aloud as well. And it really broadens the ability for students to choose that they want to go into the STEM field and not feel like it's boxed out. I know that when I go to AHEAD and all these other accessibility components for higher ed, it's great to hear people tell me that they have students who want to get into computer science, but it's difficult for them. And so I think that's kind of the overall arching direction that we're going with EquatIO. And there's a couple of things that are driving, or in my mind, like barriers to do that. So I think I have the word math on here as well, but you could just replace it with science. And I think about STEM in general. But the underlying math concept is what I, as a teacher, want my students to, I want to know, what do they know about this concept? A basic example is when I say to find what is the square root of 4, I want them to find some number that multiplied by itself is 4. And that's what I want them to communicate, but the notation and the terminology will get in the way of them being able to express their thoughts. So like if they might just see the symbol square root of 4 and not know what that is, or maybe they're an English language learner and they haven't seen those yet, or the new terminology, they can't represent their thoughts digitally because they need to find a picture that has that button. And so that is the difference, I think, between all the palette-based editors that are out there and EquatIO. So when we can utilize our prediction and a variety of other ways, these UDL methods to allow them to bring down these notation barriers and this terminology barrier, get to the underlying math concept and allow students to learn the notation and terminology as they're working with it and not have it be a prerequisite for them displaying their knowledge. So that's why I love that cycle of learning. A student can say, type SQ, get square root, and then put a 4, insert that into their Word document and have read and write read that back out as square root of 4. Like, what better way to cement the notation and the terminology to have it hear it read back aloud to you. So also, because most of our higher ed institutions use Microsoft, I'm going to focus the majority of our demo today on our Windows and Mac installable desktop app of EquatIO. We also have other flavors that I'll reference a little bit later, but this is going to be the meat of my demo is going to focus on working in Microsoft Word. And so that I think it's also very prominent in the fact in the last few weeks that Microsoft has made some changes in their equation editor, and so we're really trying to stay abreast of that and keep the ability to make math digital in Microsoft Word. And so I think one of the big things is that there's a variety of input methods that best suit students and their learning preferences, and also the curriculum of the math and science departments. And I think that's what EquatIO does well at, is enabling that. So like LaTeX, if you're a math professor sitting out there, you know LaTeX because you need to publish in a peer-reviewed journal, and LaTeX is the typesetting language that enables that and empowers you to do that. I'm not here to say that LaTeX isn't amazing, Peter. And it's funny because I always read so many things that Donald Knuth, but I've never met him personally. It is an amazing language, Leslie Lampport's LaTeX version of that. But students that shouldn't be a prerequisite. They shouldn't have to learn LaTeX. And I know it pretty well. And still, there's commands that I have to reference because I'm not quite exactly sure what they are. And that impedes my ability to think fluently. And I don't want those barriers to get in the way of the thought process. And so I think that's one thing that, even if you do know it, that's awesome. You can still utilize it. And it's also a great way, I think, to learn LaTeX is to use our prediction and come up with what LaTeX commands there are. We also have the prediction aspect, and that's what I referenced previously as being a new way to input the math. Like, you can put the spoken, the words in there, and we'll come up with the possible symbols, which I think is a great way to connect terminology with notation. And so you won't also have to memorize like what complex keyboard shortcut does that. Not to say that if you don't already know the keyboard shortcut, that's awesome. It'll most likely work. We also have a speech input. That's going to be great, so you can speak what you want to type. And again, that's that fluidness of I can speak more quickly than I can type, especially from a math standpoint. And we are constantly updating and adding to our speech input to make it more fluent to represent and render the math or the STEM content that I'm trying to create. I honestly will say too, for speech input, almost every email I make, I dictate to my phone now. I can type super fast. 3 years ago, if you'd tell me I hardly ever type emails, I would have laughed at you, but that is the way that we're moving towards, using this accessible technology for everyone. And so that's another movement that we want to do, is make it easy to speech input. The handwriting recognition blows my mind every time I do it, that I can handwrite on my touch screen and it will recognize and type what I think it should be. It's also, I have horrible handwriting as well. You can ask any of my former students. I do numbers pretty good, but sometimes I get lazy. And so the recognition, I think, is awesome. It puts that typed expression in there. And even better, what that does is once I insert it, it can be read aloud. So going from a physical handwriting to inserting it digitally and then being read aloud back to me, I love that component to make it physical to accessible. We also know some math handwriting shortcuts. If you know to go down to the subscript is the underline key, awesome, rock on with that. You want to go to the superscript with a caret, great, we do those as well. We also have like the copy and paste features, those intuitive things that you feel like it should work, we try to build in. And so I think that's a huge component. Also, like Jeff referenced with GMath, GMath is how I got here, and I think from a teacher standpoint, the most valuable commodity is your time. If you invested skills to learn some typing shortcuts, you should be able to continue to use them. So that's what we tried to build into EquatIO as well. Also, all those other handwriting, those typing shortcuts, keyboard shortcuts from other equation editors, we try to build in as well. And then I think finally the last thing would be that graphing through Desmos. When Desmos came out, I don't know how long ago it was, at least 2012 when I was using it, blew my mind, changed my teaching. honestly, like being able to put that slider in there, show the visual aspect on like a quadratic, saved me days of instruction. And so that dynamic graphing, it's really popular in high schools and moving towards some of these standardized tests and high stakes tests. And so I'm excited to help. If you've never seen it before, wow, I'm excited to show it to you. And if you have used it, I'll show you some innovative ways that we can integrate it into EquatIO, which is essentially bringing an awesome graphing tool into Microsoft Word. So I'll go into more detail throughout during my live demo, but I wanted to preference about what I'm going to be doing. So, and if you don't use Microsoft products, that's fine. One of the goals of EquatIO is to make it just like Netflix. It should work wherever you are. It shouldn't be platform dependent. So we have our desktop app for Windows and Mac. We also have EquatIO for Google, which is a Chrome extension that works across the G Suite. It works in Google Docs, Forms, Slides, Drawings, Form Responses, Google Sheets. I like to use it in Google Slides because I feel like that's the medium that I can teach best in and students can respond best in. But it's also really amazing for Google Forms and Form Responses. And then finally, we've recently in the past few months launched the EquatIO mathspace. It honestly, my brothers are both computer science people, and I've been telling them for years that I just don't have that perfect document type for me to create STEM content. And they laughed. I remember it was like 2.5 years ago, we were over Christmas, we laughed at a restaurant saying, I just need to build my own document type. And honestly, EquatIO mathspace is that. It's a web-based version that we are making a larger workspace. There's a lot of other extra features in there. There's a sharing functionality where you can have a professor share it with a student and collaborate. There's a few additional inputs like geometric shapes and freehand drawing and the ability to write inline text. So I think that inline text component is ideal for higher ed STEM courses. As I think about it, it like makes it so you can write your expressions directly in line with the rest of your work, and it typesets it beautifully. It's an SVG. It looks like it came straight out of a textbook. So I love that aspect for complex problem sets and for scientific papers and drafts of those. So we also have a lot of roadmap on that development standpoint for this feedback cycle, because I feel like the biggest validation for student work is feedback. And from the time between, I want to decrease the time between when they share their work with me and when I give them feedback, because the smaller that difference is, then the more invested in that feedback the student will be. And so we're constantly working on decreasing that feedback time to make it more valuable response to the student. So I'm excited to have that come in the next few months.
John, if you just go back one slide, one of the things about EquatIO mathspace, and when we say math, we really mean STEM, is if you think of it as a virtual whiteboard. So if you're in front of your class and you're logged in through your smart board or whichever way you access the internet in class, you can actually create problems, examples. You can kind of work through a solution using a lot of the widgets you'll see in just a few minutes. And we find, and once you're done, as John was saying, you can actually share that out with the class. So that's very, very powerful. And sometimes we talk about accessibility, showing things different ways. It can really enliven a class understanding as well as a class discussion. And one other thing I actually forgot, John, you can go to the next slide while I just kind of do this by way of housekeeping. We are actually giving away a Chromebook. So if you hopefully can hang on till the end, you do need to be present to win, but as a result of going through all this wonderful learning, if you hang around, we've got a Chromebook for one of you. Keep going, John. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, thanks. That was really great. I did appreciate that. So thank you. Yeah, I did actually had a teacher who told me, why did you call this thing the EquatIO mathspace? You should just call this EquatIO, and it would be awesome for every elementary teacher should use that for just a digital whiteboard. So she thought that was amazing. And I think the thing that I think about the most is accessibility. Jeff and I were just talking about it. Everybody I interact with as I demo EquatIO love the accessibility component, but they also will be tell us a little bit more about accessibility. And honestly, like when I first brought my product GMath to Text Help, the focus was not on accessibility. That's how I got here. I bumped into the CTO, Martin Mackay, in Singapore, and he kept saying, when are you going to make GMath accessible? When are you going to make it accessible? And honestly, I said, I don't know what you mean. Let's talk more about it. And things cascaded down, and now I'm with Text Help, and they're the leaders in accessible technology. I realized that it was an accessibility problem to make STEM digital. And so that's what I love, is that now with Text Help, we can start to work and make this digital, and then after that we can make it accessible. So when we talk about accessibility, we do talk about reading aloud, and we're also constantly upgrading more and more, just like Jeff was saying, but it's also in terms of input methods and a variety of other things. So I don't want it to just be an ed tech tool. I feel like it should be, EquatIO should be an accessibility tool as well. So similarly how Read and Write is a Swiss Army knife of literacy software, we want EquatIO to provide a wide variety of tools and features that helps students of all learning abilities and styles. So I want it to be, awesome for everyone. And so as we mentioned earlier, EquatIO integrates with Read and Write and has support for other readers, screen readers like JAWS. And so I think that's the big thing, so that digital math can be read aloud accurately. And that's kind of also the biggest thing that's on the top of my to-do list. So I was surprised to find there's not an international standard on how to read aloud math. My dev team in Belfast sometimes says things different than I do. And I realize that that's the difficult part, and to make things be read aloud, because I think it should be read one way and they might think it should be read differently. So if you have some suggestions, you can always leave us feedback and help us correct or augment different ideas. The graphing functionality of Desmos is amazing. It's compliant with the WCAG 2.0 accessibility standards that support low vision or blind students. They even have a blind coder that helps them work out. I love that effect, the accessibility functions that they build in. It's so amazing to hear a sign graph be read aloud. And I think the speech input functionality is something that is awesome. And again, we're constantly improving it. It helps students that struggle with typing or writing, so they don't have to rely on a scribe. I've gotten some videos sent in from students with limited mobility, and it literally makes me cry when I see the joy that they get from doing speech input and then seeing their math represented digitally in a way that they never could before, because we enable an alternative method of input. So that's when we talk about accessibility, that's a different method of input. And then we also still are improving on that. We would love it to be switch compatible. I would love to have a trigger in there for me to say insert to put some speech things. So it's not that we've stopped putting in and stopped developing those functions. We just are constantly working on our priority of list to be able to do that. Our prediction function, I think, is great for students that have dyslexia, dyscalculia. They might have challenging functions or symbols. So I love that we have this compendium as well of ways for students to be able to make their math digital by just using that prediction part. And then the EquatIO mathspace, I love it. It supports visual learners through imagery and freehand drawing supports. And so I think about that, like Jeff was saying, as a virtual whiteboard. I think about it like a digital lab notebook, whether you're doing some math with a sketch, or you're bringing some different chemical compounds or any things that work best on pencil and paper. I want to make it so it can work really well in the EquatIO mathspace. And so in addition to those accessibility and personalized learning features that we mentioned, and so I think I just wanted to call out a few more benefits for your students. And so the first one is that students don't need to learn LaTeX. If you already know it, awesome. That is amazing. You should be able to use it. I love the LaTeX feature, but it shouldn't be a prerequisite to learning LaTeX. It's usually something students have to do on their own time in addition to all their other normal coursework. And so in order to complete their digital problem sets or homework assignments, LaTeX shouldn't be a requirement. With EquatIO, they no longer have to worry about learning LaTeX or other math languages. They can just focus on learning the key concepts of the curriculum. And then secondly, EquatIO enables students to use the devices and the platforms that they become familiar with. And so I think that is awesome as well, is that they don't have to think about using a separate device, or they can just carry along one device, and the historical challenges of writing digital math and STEM courses have been left behind. I had so many times, my classroom was next to an English language arts teacher, and they would joke about the amazing collaborative aspects, and I would be envious of the way that their students were working digitally, using their computers, progressing the way that they've taught. And I felt like I was stagnated and still teaching the same way in my 15th year as I did a lesson in my first year. And I was thinking that we should be evolving how I connect with students, because those students have dramatically changed. And that's my goal, is to connect with the students and then teach them. And so I think that's the best part, is that the students don't have to return to pen and paper. They can continue on that progression of using technology, and EquatIO will level that playing field. And then finally, I think that students can feel supported by their institution to pursue any major or minor program. They'll have the right tools to support no matter the department or the subject. And so that, I think, is awesome. They're not going to be limited based on any of the requirements or prerequisites of the courses. And then for the faculty, it doesn't just support students. It's got total benefits of the faculty, for department chairs, for professors. I think about my time starting out teaching. I was a teaching assistant, and so I actually got a master's of math and was pursuing a PhD in math because I thought I wanted to be a professor. I would say kind of doing that was like my gateway drug into teaching high school math, because I was teaching college algebra and I thought, I'm teaching high school content to students just out of high school. Let's go back into high school where they lost that love of math. And I feel like seeing that exposure for department chairs is nice, that EquatIO can help them attract and retain more students to STEM majors or minors, because it gives that additional support. I think it also will help departments comply with their accessibility requirements. When I was speaking with one of my mentors, she's a dean, associate dean, she said that our accessibility component is something that professors don't necessarily think about, but it's something that's helpful for us to not have to spend a lot of time on. It's a byproduct of what we can do. And I think some of the other benefits that it gives is that it makes tasks like creating or editing digital handouts faster. It's easier to complete due to the prediction, the math writing shortcuts. I honestly used to say I could write my problem set in 15 minutes, but it would take me an hour to type. So I was like, not only just doubling, I was quadrupling my work type. Now I can get very close to being similar. And then for more complicated problems, my students can work faster actually by working digitally, because they can use copy and paste, and they don't make transcription errors. So I think that's a really great component. Secondly, professors can make more of their classroom materials digital. And so that's going to decrease handouts, and they can keep track that they need to keep track of. I, as a teacher, lost paper sometimes, or students didn't turn them in and they would blame it on me for losing them. So my organizational methods are much better when everything is digital. And it makes my reviewing and grading assignments much more manageable. And then finally, without the need to teach students LaTeX or other math languages, you can focus on teaching the curriculum. You don't have to spend time focusing on how do you enter this digitally. So I think those are all things that are super powerful and are kind of better for the overall feel for why should we work with digital math. So now this is my favorite part. I'm going to jump into the demo part. And so let's go ahead and pop open our Microsoft Word. And so the big thing is that it works with Microsoft Word's desktop version, and it's an installable app. So I have EquatIO down here as a toolbar on the bottom. I have my Microsoft Word document, and I also have read and write floating over here on the right. I like to minimize because I really only use a few of the tools, so I like to minimize some of the toolbar things. That's a read and write function I can change in the settings. So one of my favorite components is that that speech input part. So as I said, that I like to dictate my emails. The same thing goes with my speech input. So let's say that I have something and I wanted to create the following expression. And so I can literally just pop it open and use my speech input. It's already in there, so I'll delete this. And there we go. We'll put it at the top. So I can then, it'll start doing my recording. 3x squared plus 12x plus 12. And so you can see that it says over here, this is what I think you said, and then this is the math that we put. So all I have to do is I can click insert that math, and not only will it be something that is inserted in there, it's also going to be able to read that aloud with read and write. So that's the beautiful part, is I can just click on that, and then we'll read that aloud.
3x squared plus 12x plus 12.
And so I think that really does a great job of cementing what that idea is. Once I can read it in, and then I can speak it and then have it be read back to me. That is super fast. I don't need to know any of those shortcuts. So I think that's a basic one, but also I can start speaking, and you'll see that it will render what it thinks I'm saying, 3x squared plus 12x plus 12. Then there's a bunch of other stuff. So I can come over here as well, and it thought that A should be part of a math, so I can delete it over here. I could also type it if I want. So I could type like the square root of 4, and it'll put that in there. So I think that's a great way that I can utilize that speech input component to render my math. I also want to hop over to the prediction aspect. There was the speech input here. I can use prediction on the right-hand side, but I wanted to talk a little bit about the prediction items here, and that I can predict all of these different aspects. And so when I want to see what are those terms, or what is that symbol, what is that notation, I can then just go ahead and utilize it. So that's a great time. Even if I was doing some logic, if I wanted to do well, what is for all, I don't know, for all X. So I could utilize all those components in there. That if I want to know some of those logic notation, I can literally just use prediction on that. We also have a handwriting recognition component that I referenced. So for that, I can just literally here I'm using my trackpad. I'm not even using a touchscreen, and my handwriting is kind of bad. So I could say that's 3x squared. It's constantly updating over there. So maybe if I want to do the integral from 1 to pi of 3x squared, it'll update that as I'm going. And so then now I can just insert that into my document. So I can go from something handwritten to something that's typed in there. And so I can see that that's in my document, and then now it can be read aloud as well. So I love that it's so easy for me to go from something that is handwritten to something that was typed. I was talking at one of the conferences, and I had an accessibility director come talk to me, and they say that they have a scribe that they pay, full time to do that, and that they won't need to. Their scribe will no longer need to have math content ability. They can just literally copy what is on the board or copy something from a PDF with that handwriting aspect. So I love that aspect to help break down the level of knowledge that's required for something to work. And so I also wanted to talk a little bit more about some of the higher level items that we have. So even like with that prediction, I can do some integrals, and I can use my handwriting to do a variety of other things, but I can also utilize those in the prediction component. So I can say, like, if I wanted to do the integral, I can just start typing int, and it pops up with two options. You want the definite integral or an integral. So like we were talking about, for a student who's in a beginning calculus class, that helps give that terminology of like, oh yeah, that definite integral has that a to b aspect. And so they can then say like, oh, I should put something there. And like I was saying, you could come down here and you could put a 0, and then instead of b, you can delete it, and then you can say like, I don't know how to make pi. You can literally just type out pi in there. Or the same thing with infinity. That's one of the few LaTeX commands that I always forget because it's not fully spelled out. I can just type INF and then hit enter, and it'll put that infinity in there. And so I can then utilize all that prediction aspect to type out all of my words. So I think that's a great thing that I have to work and increase my productivity, but also for students who aren't as well-versed, it's a great way to do that. We also have a ton of chemistry compounds in there. So if I start typing Al, I can say, oh yeah, I want aluminum diacetate, scroll down to that, hit enter, and I have it included with the parentheses, the subscripts, all of that cumbersome notation. And then I can just say, oh, I want an arrow right by typing ARR. And so all of those cumbersome notational components, I want to be able to use prediction on that. So that's something that's really great for adding that component in there to make it easier to make that digital. And then finally, we have a formula prediction as well. You can go into your options menu and toggle those on and off. I have them all turned on. I have math, chemistry, and formulas. And so you can toggle those off. If you don't use chemistry and you toggle that off, there's a lot less of those prediction items. So like you saw all those aluminum ones, here I just type AL and it gives me alpha, aleph not. So I can make all of those high order math notational components without having to know what the shortcut is. So I love that aspect. The formula component though, if I start typing like SI, it'll say like, do you want sine, sigma, similar, a simple interest? Oh, Simpson's rule for integration. I would never type that out. I might have to do it once or twice if I'm using that, or I would keep that referencing, but that prediction aspect lets me bring that all the way in. And so I think that's a great aspect of how to use prediction to increase your productivity. The other component is if I was learning LaTeX and I was like, I'm using some of these notational constraints, I can just pop open the LaTeX tab and I can see this is the LaTeX commands that will create that. I can even then copy and paste that and put in another document if I'm collaborating in a tech document with someone else. So that's a great way to generate LaTeX from other ways. I think about the same thing for my statistics classes. If I want to make the correlational coefficient of a sample for R, I type COR, hit enter, and it prints that up, and I can then wouldn't have to type in all of these LaTeX commands. So that's one of the best parts is I feel like no matter what amazing, no matter how fast a typist you are, no matter what, if you're a super user with all those shortcut commands, the prediction will be much faster, and then you can generate off of that. And even things like if you're like, what is plus or minus? Oh yeah, it's /PM. So if you're a math major and you're trying to get your PhD, you want to publish a paper, you're trying to get into a journal, whether how big or small, and you need to learn LaTeX. That was one of the big components of my master's degree, was figuring out how do I write my master's thesis out. and had to learn the lot set commands to do that, to typeset it. So here, if I could use my prediction parts, that would make life a lot easier. If I could figure out, like, well, how do I make the alpha? Well, it's /alpha, but not all those are so easy to do. And then so just to show like some of the copy and paste components, like here, if I have this, why is this digital better? I can just type in QU, get the quotient rule, and then I can insert that math in there. And then my student, or me, if I'm working, I can continue to work from that. So I can put it in, and maybe I have a specific U and V, then I can literally say that maybe it was like 2x. So maybe my U was 2x. So I can highlight that, put that as 2x and say like, oh, that was U. Sorry, I can update that if I want. So I can highlight those if I want, and then copy. So I can command C that and then be like, okay, that's my U. So that would be like 2. I can paste that. And let's say I want V to be X minus 1. So X minus 1. I can then highlight that component. And I want that to be V. So I can paste in there. And then I can find my du dx. And so I can, if I want to put a parentheses in here, if I start one, it tries to suggest where my next should be. So I could say I want that to be the parentheses, and then du dx. I would put as 2, and so I can just highlight all of those. And so working from that, I can make life a lot easier. And so I think that is a really a fun way to make it more digital. And if I wanted to, I can delete that, and I could say like times, if I want to use a dot or a parentheses. So those are all aspects that I can work on using. So I think that's a great way for students to be able to continue to work digitally. Just the other part is math writing shortcuts. If I have like 3x squared over 14y cubed, and I wanted to take all that and put that in another numerator, I can just literally highlight that command, and I can slash, and it puts it all in the numerator. And so I think that's a fun way to just keep on working to be much faster, especially if I'm doing like some trigonometric identities or some proofs that can have a lot of additional steps in there. So I love those components to be able to work on and make it that digital aspect, making it better.
And John, that's also just the different ways you're interacting with it. It actually is really making it accessible for students who maybe have motor difficulties or can speak different things rather than so you're actually opening it up to a wide variety of audiences. By the way, for now, and correct me if I'm wrong, John, the Chrome extension version of this product, you can actually be a Spanish native speaker and speak Spanish, and it'll take Spanish verbal and convert it to digital. And we're working on expanding that capability into the Word files as well.
Yeah, so that's we have a couple different objects, and we're trying to make them be feature compatible. So you will see some of the things that localization is awesome. Like you could pop open on the Chrome extension, say you want to localize into Espanol, and then do the speech input and click on and say raíz cuadrada, and it would do square root of, it would show me the symbol for the radical and then a 4 inside there, and I'd insert it, and it would then be reading aloud in Spanish. So we're working on localization into here, as well as the EquatIO mathspace, and additional languages as well, like French and other languages that would come after that. So yeah, so I'm really excited about that. From teaching internationally, I had so many English language learners that loved math because they didn't have that vocabulary aspect. And you know, from my last teaching job was down in Chile, so I would have so many students that would be fluent from, they know what it was in Spanish, but not what it was in English. So yeah, we're working on that. And the multimodal aspect that you're talking about as well, Jeff. So like, if I know kind of how to say something, I can start it and say h of x equals 3x to the power of 5 minus 5x cubed plus 3. You can see that it'll try to do something, but maybe there I wanted to say h of x, so then I would have to come by here and say like h of and then x. And then I can end the parentheses if I want, but I can then edit, start off with speech and then move to something else. And so I think that's the same thing here. I can start here and I can hop over and say like, well, maybe I wanted that to be 3y prime. And so I can just use my handwriting to add those in there. So I thought that was a J. I do have bad handwriting. So I could say like y prime and it'll incorporate those in there. So I love that way that it's a multimodal. You can interact in different ways. So it's a great a great way to interact with that. I did want to highlight too the graphing component there. So like from this math aspect, I can hop and pop open the Desmos capability, which is really great. So if I jump in there, it already pre-populates that. So that's something that I did in speech. I spoke that function, and then now if I insert that, I can literally insert the graph into my Word document. So it's, I think, a great way for that accessible part. I can also, if I wanted to edit that and populate that, it's a great way to give students templates and the graph on that. And I can zoom in and zoom out and say like, oh, I want a different window. And then if I insert that, it'll change what that window looks like. So the graphing component is really great to be able to utilize there.
And in fact, John, the great Desmos product is made even greater by using some of our additional tools. So in a sense, it might even work better in EquatIO than standalone because of the accessibility features.
Yeah, I would say that same thing. I really think like our prediction feature. So we had the speech input. So like if I was trying to use Desmos, I wouldn't be able to speak on that component. But the same if I had like the h of x, I could do 3x, and I want to put that fifth power in there, and I might not know to use the keyboard shortcut of the caret. I can just start typing like to the power, and then it'll put it up in the fifth power. So and I can literally use that prediction component to create that graph, and you'll see that it'll like 5x cubed, I can start typing the cube, and it shows me that it's the 3 in the superscript. So that's the one differentiating component. One of the differentiating components between Desmos and us is you can utilize our prediction engine while you're creating your expression. So, and then that last thing, I want to talk a little bit about the accessibility here. I love that the Desmos has that accessibility. I can do Command T and put an audio trace, and then hear what that graph sounds like. It's just a great way to figure out what that sounds like. So that's another way to interact and have that accessibility work in what does that graph sound like, what's going on, is it increasing, decreasing? And then you can also build in, I'm going to jump into the math space, but I'm going to show that everything we can do within here in the math space works as well. So in the math space, all I have to do is open up the Chrome browser, and from there I can do my EquatIO, EquatIO or EquatIO.com, EquatIO.texthelp.com, and we have this sharing space. And so I can generate here, this will have my dashboard of all the things that I've generated. I can also just create a new space as well. And so the benefit of that new space is for me to be able to create any of those digital, so as Jeff was referencing, it's like a digital whiteboard, but let's say that I have some examples. I have a derivative example. Maybe I made the graph over here in Desmos. I can then just copy that graph and then paste it into my Desmos in my graph. So that I can import the same thing into my Microsoft Word. So I want my students to maybe interact with this. And so I can write f of x at a graph, and I can just say what's f of 4, it's 16. It'll even graph f of x, f prime of x. Maybe I want like f prime, and then do prime again. So I want to know f double prime. And so what is that going to be? So I can literally just use that prediction, and then it'll graph that, and I can utilize Desmos to do that. But I can even build in some of the sliding aspects. So maybe I want to know what happens as A changes in there, create a slider, and then have my students explore what's going on with that. I can insert that graph into the space and then ask them to explore the first and second derivative of, so explore the first and second derivative of, and then I can pop, so that's text, and then I can pop in the math there. So I can say h of x equals x squared, and then I think let's see, what was it? X squared minus the absolute value of x minus 4. And so I could also, if I wanted to, I could just come over here and copy this and then pop back in and then paste it. So that's another beautiful aspect of the copy and paste part that the digital works that this paper pencil doesn't do. And so then from there, I might also hit a new line and say, don't forget to talk about critical points. And we'll just assume that I spelled that correctly. Because when I insert that, that's just a beautiful insertion there for that typesetting where it is, I can overlay that on top, I can put that wherever I want, and I can then, if I could incorporate that. It's an SVG, so it's scalable, and I can then talk about that. I might also want to say, oh, what about continuity or a variety of other things? And so I could also, with my handwriting recognition or my freehand drawing, I could say, give some feedback of like, this is my H of X. And so I can utilize that component. So it's just this way to build on. I can also change colors. And so I think that is the document type that I've always wanted to have. It's just a quick way to do nice math with text and then have a graph and then be able to use the prediction on that. So if my student wants to go ahead and edit this, they can pop and edit it, and then they can take this math and kind of work from there. So I could copy that, move over here to my example and say like, okay, well, I'm going to take from here, what is my derivative going to look like? It's going to be prime, and then I can change this to be like 2x. And so if I can also hit just insert this. I know I didn't fully derive that, but I can take that and move it down, and then I can continue to work on that, those different formulas, and continue to work step by step to continue doing that. The other part is if I wanted to, let's say I change the double prime, there's a couple keyboard shortcuts. Like if I select this and hit shift and pop in here and hit shift, you might see the insert down. So that'll just fully align those in there. If I hit shift and then insert down, it'll align that directly below my original statement. So that's a great way to align those. We're working on that features there.
John, we are running out of time a little bit. Can you take a minute or two and show the widgets?
Exactly.
Show a couple of things. One of the things I like to do sometimes is I take a line and a triangle and show levers and pulleys and all that sort of thing, because you can do physics. But just talk about that for just a couple minutes.
Yeah, so again, the same thing that we generally will have like a diagram or something that we need to go work with, or like give some sort of functionality on top of what, like, to augment the type of problem that we're asking. And so we have just a variety of different widgets down here. Like I could even say like, oh, I want to have a cube down here of a certain that has a certain mass, and then what for this lever, and then we have some text helpers here. So I have like a pulling text helper who I can just drag out and say that if I want to pull this up, and so I can easily create a sketch that talks about those momentum, different types of things. We also have lots of different mechanics problems if I want to talk about like balloons, and then put some arrows in there. All of those aspects we have built in here, and we're constantly adding those in. We have springs, clock faces, scales, and then even some blank coordinate planes and things for them to sketch in there. So it's really kind of constantly building out. We're adding more and more items in that to make it easier to construct any type of problem that you have.
And we think this kind of whiteboard and showing students sort of live kind of what you're talking about just adds to the ability of a particular student to understand the concepts that you're trying to express. Some may do it just from hearing you. Some may do it just from reading the textbooks. Many will be able to see you do this on this virtual whiteboard, and all of a sudden things click in their own minds. So this is part of, when we talk about accessible, we talk about all these different elements of students engaging with the material, and you as a professor or teacher sort of showing that material to the students and allowing them to, in a sense, grasp it in a number of different ways. So that's very cool.
Yeah, exactly. And one of the ways you can interact with that, so great, if they weren't there live, you can just download it as a PNG, insert that into your Word document, and you can also just share it live as well. So you can share it through your LMS, make a copy. We're working on a really awesome feedback response part where they could share that through, if you were using Moodle or Canvas, D2L, any of those LMSs, you can just literally take and create this link, and then they open it up and they'll have their own copy of that, and they could work on it. So it's a great way to disseminate information and other items to work with.
Cool. John, is there anything else that you want to show as we kind of move into the final portion of our time together?
Like I just keep saying, there's some really awesome graph editing capabilities. Like you can build an applet. I have some normal distribution calculators and all those things that I want my students to utilize in these problems. So I can build something and then copy it and then give them like a template to use in that. So I think that's just really great, where if I just paste that in, how awesome is that for them to just change their different values for that shading part and talk about probability. So it gives that visual aspect so that they can work with. So I think that's the other main component that I want to look at, is it's not only just changing the way that they work, it's also changing what they're working with and how they can express themselves. So that's really it. And there's just, we're continuing to work on it and add features and literally gaining those feedback from teachers and students on how to incorporate it. So click on that send feedback and tell us what you want, and I try to get back to you in 24 hours. So
cool. Let's get back to, if we can, to the main presentation. If you have questions, now's probably a good time to sort of go through this. So back up just one step. Yeah. So in terms of pricing, and what we're showing here is campus-wide pricing, but there are other options that you can explore with your particular salesperson. But on the top is the size of the campus. So you'll see it's all pretty reasonable. So the top line says if you're just EquatIO only and you're a 15,000 student campus, for example, it'd be $4,920 for a year. These are all subscription prices, and that would allow every single student, faculty, and staff to have access to EquatIO. If you're an existing read and write site license customer, there's a little bit of a discount, like 25%, so it's pretty significant. So I know some of you, I saw the attendee list, some of you are my customers from having site licenses. Very modest pricing. Next slide, John. So just a couple things, just by way of sort of thinking out loud. Just flip them all down and I'll talk through them. First of all, EquatIO is free for teachers, professors. There's the link there, texthelp.com/free-for-teachers. If you go, it'll say, do you want EquatIO? Do you want read and write? And then once you register, it takes us 24 to 48 hours to process. So that's easy enough. Anybody, any one of your students can just download EquatIO, either the Windows version or the Chrome, or Mac version or the Chrome extension version. Anybody can do a 30-day trial for free. We try to, we and the pilot as well, we believe so strongly in these products that we want people to try them before you actually spend any money. And then once you try them, we generally find people really like them. So generally speaking, we can set up a pilot for your campus. Normally what we do is make sure that you have a good path for getting people involved. And then we'll come out and do a little bit of training. We have an online website. It's training.texthelp.com. We won't go to it, but that's what it is. It has training videos and information for all of our products, Read and Write, EquatIO, and there's some others as well. We're always open to doing any demonstrations for you or webinars. Your local salesperson can kind of handle that. You can let John or I know. Of course, we would love to give you a quote. But right now, what I'd like to do, so that's just a quick way of doing that, is just, next slide, John. Yeah, Caitlin and Dina are our marketing people, just kind of going through questions. Submit your questions now, and Dina and Caitlin, if you all can chime in with, by the way, stay on for the Chromebook, because they've also got that name in just a minute or two. But are there any questions or group of questions that have come up for either John or I?
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, we do have a few really great questions. So first, one that came up a lot is the read and write integration in mathspace, in EquatIO mathspace, and if there's the ability to put alt text with the images so that those can be read aloud.
That's a great question. Currently, you could use the screenshot reader to read text parts, but it doesn't do the math part. So we're like we said, we're working on making that digital part first, and we have in our near-term roadmap to make that accessible. That's like one of our top priorities, to make it so it can be read aloud.
And just chiming in on that, Dina, a little bit, and a lot of you who've been Read and Write customers for a while, one of the things that we take very seriously is feedback. And what I tell people is, please always give us your feedback. It doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be done immediately or even at all, but it definitely goes into a consideration list. And we have sprints. We're using an agile process for modifying our software. And so what we do is every time a sprint is completed, we look at the pile of features, timing, and everything. And so feedback is very important. And you know, we're still in the first year of EquatIO. We recognize there are lots of areas where we can make it even more world-class, and we intend to do that. So
great, thanks, Jeff. I think we touched on this a little bit, John, but could you talk a bit more? Are all of the math inserts, do they go in as images? And also, can they be read aloud by other tools besides read and write?
Yeah, so everything we put in goes in as an image, and most of the things, so like the Desmos graphs they won't read them out type of thing. But the other things that we put in, we also assign the spoken text as an alt text, so other screen readers can come by and read that alt text as well if they can consume it. So that's obviously we work easy. We test the most with read and write because we control that as well. But we make images, we insert them, and they have alt text to them.
Great. And from an administrative standpoint, is it possible to turn off any of the features for exams, or if you don't want people to have access to formulas, for example, in the prediction feature?
We currently don't have an ability for an administrator to do that. Currently, the only way is kind of like the press to test mode for the calculators, where you'd have to come by and have them switch those off in their features and then monitor a little bit. We are thinking about putting those in, and we have some infrastructure that's been developing to try to make that consideration.
As a parallel, Dina, and whoever asked the question, for read and write, we have a lot of that, and more than likely down the road, as we get more mature, that's going to be a part of what we do.
Yes, and that's the best is we get to build on the technology that read and write develops as well. So we'll incorporate a lot of that down the road.
Can you talk a little bit more about anything you have in the works for blind students, particularly in terms of, switching from the different kind of input features and any of that?
Yeah, so I think that, like we keep talking about, accessibility is a core feature that we want to make sure that it's accessible for all, I keep saying. So TextHelp does cater most to students who are a core competence or core audience, which do have vision. Like, so when we take our spoken math and highlight it, we assume that you can kind of see that part to make it less cumbersome, verbose, I should say, not cumbersome. And so we're working on making that a little better. Like as I keep talking with different districts, they asked me if it was Switch compatible the first month that it came out last April. And I had to say to them, to be honest, I don't even know what that means. Can you tell me what that means? And so the more and more I learn about that accessible components, we can progress them onto our roadmap. And so like I was talking about, I would love to see a speech input command where I just say insert. And so we can have that trigger. If I'm in speech and doing that, why could it not be able to insert? So we're looking at doing a lot of those things as we finish off our kind of features as well. So as Jeff said, we use a sprint model. Every month we work on a new component. Usually we update it. And so those are some of the things we're considering in our future sprints.
Dina, I think we have time for one more question. Pick a good one.
Okay. There was a question. I lost it. Oh, is there a mobile app?
Hey, so I have a mobile app that I've been demoing, and so there will be a mobile app that should be released sometime before the calendar pages turn. If not, it'll be a nice Valentine's Day present to everyone. Yeah. So as I was saying, like currently I'm using a MacBook to demo. I'll be able to utilize a mobile device to use the handwriting recognition because that's a touch screen, and utilize some of those features very soon. So I'm super excited about those components.
So obviously, Dina, it's nice to be the developer, right? I think we recognize that there's lots of input tools that we'll be gravitating towards as time goes on, and we don't want to overpromise because some of the things that have been asked may be months away or a year or two. We are committed already. What we've heard from the marketplace is this is far ahead of anything that's out there. And we recognize, while that's true, we have a long way to go. Read and write right now, I think, has about 12 or 13 million users. EquatIO is just under 1 million. And I think John's betting that EquatIO may even overtake read and write before too long. So he's got a lot of work to do. Dina, I think we have a poll question. There we go. So as you guys see this, what we'd like to do, first of all, thank you for your time. We recognize how precious and valuable it is, and just want to say thank you for taking an hour out of your very busy schedule, particularly the beginning of new semesters, to listen. Hopefully you found it extremely beneficial. We are and they put 2 math geeks on. I forgot a lot of it, but we are just flat out excited. You saw some of the science notation. Think about taking that virtual space. You saw some physics things. Eventually, we'll be able to draw molecules up on there. So, we're really excited about it. We'd like to follow up in a way that's appropriate. So please let us know how that is. The poll question will be up another few seconds, and Dina and Caitlin will kind of pick a Chromebook winner. And I don't know, John, if we have drum rolls or anything else like that. But please answer that poll question. And Dina or Caitlin, do you have a Chromebook winner for us?
We do. The winner is Ann Newman.
So
Ann will be contacting you after this to work out the details.
Congratulations, Ann. Well done. Thank you so much for sort of staying on. Finally, last slide, if we can go to the last slide, just to end. It's 3:01, so we're a minute late. But if we can go to that last slide, let us know how we can best help. If you're in that Southeast Mid-Atlantic, email me, jeffl@texthelp.com. If you want to reach John, it's John. Is it, John, do you have a letter or something?
Yeah, it's j.mcgowan.
j.mcgowan, McGowan, @texthelp.com. Or just reach out to us at u.s.info@texthelp.com. We will get back to you. This has been recorded. We'll get back to you with a little note on how to access that recording. Thank you so much for your time. We hope that 2018 is an awesome year. We think we can help in that. Let us know in any way, either on EquatIO or if you have questions on Read and Write or any one of our other products. Please do not hesitate to reach out to us. Thank you so much for your time. Dina and Caitlin, thank you for running a great webinar. Everybody have an awesome, wonderful day. Take care now. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.